Major funding for Election 2018 AETN Debates is provided by AARP Arkansas.
Hello everyone, Debate Week continues and we're back. Now, the race for Secretary of State. Our candidates tonight in alphabetical order: Susan Inman, the Democratic Party nominee; Christopher Olson, the Libertarian Party candidate; and John Thurston, the Republican nominee. Our candidates will be questioned by a panel of Arkansas reporters: Donna Terrell of KLRT Fox 16, Gretchen Ritchie of the Malvern Daily Record, and Alex Kinlan of the Van Buren County Democrat. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. Each will have 2 minutes to respond to a question. Rebuttals are limited to 1 minute. And at the conclusion of the debate, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. The order of opening statements, questioning, rebuttals, and closing statements was, of course, determined prior to the broadcast by a drawing in which the candidates or their representative participated. Our timekeeper this hour is Angela Cook of AETN. And according to our drawing, Mr. Thurston has the first opening statement tonight. Mr. Thurston.
All right. Well, hello, Arkansas, and thank you for taking the time to learn about who is running for your offices there at the Capitol, state level, county, any level that where a public official holds. Thank you for participating. Thank you, AETN, for allowing us to be here. My name's John Thurston, and I'm currently the Commissioner of State Lands. I'm a father of 5. I'm a husband. I am born and raised here in Arkansas, and my first paying job was picking purple hull peas for my uncle down the road. So I have been in the workforce for a long time. But I was elected in 2010, and very few people gave me the chance to win, gave me sorry, messed up a little bit. Didn't give me the opportunity to win. But Arkansas gave me an opportunity in 2010. They elected me as the first Republican in state history. And I have been responsible for an annual budget of $40 million. I oversee a staff of professionals of 38. And during my time as land commissioner, there hasn't been a hint of corruption or any controversy during my time as land commissioner. And so I feel that the experience that I have obtained in running a constitutional office, much like the Secretary of State, which is multifaceted, has several line items of business, positions me to step into the role of Secretary of State and take it to the next level.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Olson, 2 minutes.
Yes, my name is Christopher Olson. I'm the Libertarian nominee for Secretary of State, and I appreciate AETN and UCA for hosting this debate and giving us the opportunity to discuss the issues that are relevant to the state and relevant to the office that we're all seeking. I'm also thankful for my wife and my 3 children for supporting me on this journey. As Secretary of State, as a candidate for Secretary of State, I am interested in working toward ensuring that the election process and voting process remains secure, and that every candidate and every party is treated equally by the Secretary of State's office. I would like to work with the legislature to increase and to open up ballot access for all parties and for all candidates. As has been mentioned, the Secretary of State's office does many things, so I would also like to work and evaluate, work with the legislature where it's appropriate to streamline and make it easier for businesses and to do business in Arkansas as far as filings and incorporations go. And finally, I think it's important as a libertarian, a person who is not a Republican and not a Democrat, to have that independent voice on the Board of Apportionment when redistricting happens here in a couple of years, so that process is not completely captured and controlled by Republicans and Democrats who all too often use that process for partisan purposes. Thank you.
Mr. Olson, thank you. Ms. Inman.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here today. Thank you, AETN, and thank you, AARP, for sponsoring this wonderful opportunity to speak to you about our candidacy to be your next Secretary of State. I can tell you I am ready, and I'm excited to be the next Secretary of State of Arkansas. I have worked in state and county government for over 20 years. I have served as a state election commissioner, a county election commissioner. I have been called upon by the U.S. Department of State to observe and monitor elections in foreign countries. I've also worked in the Secretary of State's office as its Director of Elections. Now, I'm well aware that the charge of the Secretary of State's office is huge. That one office is multifaceted, as one of my opponents spoke about. It is probably the most complex constitutional office we have. Now, I have a plan, and I have experience, and I bring leadership to this post. I want to save millions of dollars for our taxpayers, too. I want Arkansas to move to vote by mail because I want more citizens to participate. And voting by mail will save a lot of money for the state of Arkansas. When you vote by mail, which is nothing new to Arkansas, we do it already, it's called absentee voting. A ballot is mailed to the home of the voter, registered voter, who has the time to look at the ballot, think about the ballot, decide if they want to mail it back or drop it off at a vote center. But going back with that ballot will be a signed statement by the voter, a copy of the photo ID of the voter, or it won't be counted. It's secure, it's effective, and it will increase voter participation in the state of Arkansas, plus it will save millions of dollars. I look forward to a lively debate here, and I know there are a lot of things that we can talk about. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Ms. Inman, thank you. First question tonight comes from Ms. Terrell, and it goes to Ms. Inman.
Hello, Ms. Inman. Whichever one of you is elected as Secretary of State, you will sit on the Board of Apportionment with the Governor and the Attorney General. You will have a powerful voice in election redistricting. You will help determine how the district lines are drawn for voters to choose state reps, U.S. Congress, and Senate districts. When this has been done in the past, some people have claimed that it was disproportionately drawn. My question to you is, what is your approach to redrawing the lines, and will party play a role in it?
The Board of Apportionment consists of the Governor, the Attorney General, and the Secretary of State. Those are three partisan offices. So they will have a say in that. There is a movement going on across our country, and even in Arkansas, to move that away from those three politicians and put it into the hands of individuals appointed by politicians, but it will give a balance of equal representation when the lines are drawn. I think it's incumbent upon us to do something like that. It takes away the potential for partisanship. Now, our legislative boundaries, they can be affected by partisan decisions because the purpose typically has been to make sure the incumbent remains in that district before the lines are redrawn. That should not be a consideration. We should draw our lines to fit the needs of the community. My experience as an election official in the Secretary of State's office, of which I am the only candidate who has worked in the Secretary of State's office, prepares me to understand the voting as we look at it nationally or as we look at it statewide, to ensure and protect those voters as they cast their ballot and they have a voice. And it's all about giving voters a voice by drawing lines that are effective and reasonable and make sense and allow for participation for everyone. Thank you.
Ms. Inman, thank you. Mr. Olson, 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you. That's a very good question. As I mentioned in my opening statement, this is one of those instances that partisanship can play a negative role. Drawing districts Going back to the early days of our nation, gerrymandering is legendary as far as the negative effect that parties can play in this role. If I am elected as a libertarian, I have less incentive to play the old political games that the Republicans and Democrats play when redistricting. I am interested in seeing districts that make sense, that are compact, where people in the district share a commonality of interests. You don't have people in one area connected to another area by like a thin band across the top, like my district, my state rep district. Doesn't make sense. I live in Fulton County. My state rep lives 2 hours away in Pocahontas. That doesn't make any sense. So I'm interested in seeing districts that are compact, that make sense, where people share commonalities of interests, communities that deal with each other are in the same district, instead of having a state rep that lives 2 hours away and you have to leave the district to get to Pocahontas. So it doesn't make any sense. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Thurston, 2 minutes.
Well, as was stated by one of the other candidates, there is a movement going on to put the redistricting process under an independent council, independent board, if you will. There's no such thing as an independent board or independent council. Everyone on that board is appointed by someone, and I dare say is influenced by that someone who appoints that individual. And the reason I suppose the movement is going on now, I have a question: what is broken and why now? Because this will be the first time, assuming Republicans take the governor's spot, the Attorney General, Secretary of State, this will be the first time that Republicans have drawn the lines since Reconstruction. So why now and what is broken? And if it is broken, then we have only one party to look to. My libertarian talked about the partisan games. Well, there hadn't been many partisan games in redistricting because only one party has drawn those lines for 140 years. So just a little clarification, the JP lines are drawn by the election commissioners. The congressional lines are drawn by the General Assembly. And the state, House, and Senate lines are drawn by the Board of Apportionment. So this redistricting process will need to begin as soon as we're all sworn in January, because there needs to be coordination with the counties. I would like to see lines that coordinate with each other. I'm had enough of seeing lines going everywhere, having multiple ballot styles and ballot splits, if you will. And the old voting equipment is having trouble with those multiple ballot styles also. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Inman, 1 minute rebuttal.
Thank you. I'm disappointed that my opponent wants to keep the redistricting in the hands of politicians. And I think if we move to a larger board, the partisan makeup will be far more balanced. And it will give an opportunity for the citizens, the people, if you will, to help with the redistricting. And we should have some fair lines drawn. Thank you.
Ms. Ritchie has the next question, and it goes first to Mr. Olson.
Mr. Olson, how do you feel about the voter ID ballot issue? Sorry, that's on the ballot in the November election. Do you support it? Do you feel like we don't need to show the ID when we go to vote?
Well, personally, I don't like to show ID for anything. I don't think that voter ID is necessary. The type of fraud that voter ID would prevent is incredibly rare and hardly ever happens. The kind of voter fraud we typically see involves absentee ballots, and it doesn't involve stray citizens or random citizens doing it. It involves political insiders trying to game the system to win. So I think that the proposed voter ID law would potentially do more harm than good. I don't think it would prevent fraud because the fraud isn't there to begin with, at least the type of fraud that this would prevent. And there is the potential there for certain communities to be disenfranchised by not having ready access to get those IDs or not having those IDs anyway. This topic is infamous for its use by Republicans to try to suppress the Democratic vote. At least that's the message that I hear and I tend to believe. Thank you.
Mr. Thurston, 2 minutes.
So Democrats don't have IDs. I didn't know that. I guess obviously he hasn't talked with county clerks about this issue or the public, because this was polled just not long ago by Talk Business Politics, where 71% of Arkansans are in favor for voter ID. I support voter ID. You know, there's identification pieces in all of the election process. Even when you register, you have to use your driver's license number or the last 4 digits of your social. If you leave that blank, it will be flagged, and then when you show up to the poll, you have to show identification. So there's identification parts already in our voting process. Now, I was talking to one particular county clerk where an individual came in to vote, and they said, well, I'm sorry, you already voted. He said, no, I didn't. I didn't come in. I didn't vote. Someone had come in, used his name, and this was back before voter ID was even a law or enforced. So voter ID is state law. It will be on the ballot in November. The voters will decide whether or not it's going to be put into our Constitution. And so we're coming into an age where whether we want to show ID or not, we are coming into an age where you are going to have to show ID for everything. There's the enhanced driver's license that is now being implemented in Arkansas. That is going to be a driver's license that proves citizenship. There's another example where a clerk told me that there was a non-citizen who voted 6 times in an election before they found out, before they caught it. So there's a lot of things that needs to be done in securing our elections.
Ms. Inman, 2 minutes.
Thank you. The voter ID law is on the ballot in November to change the Constitution. We are also living under a voter ID law right now, written into our statutes. So we do this now. This is then the first cycle started last year when we had to show ID to vote. Now, do I think that voter ID law written into our Constitution is necessary? No, I don't. But it seems to be the will of the people. And if it's the will of the people, I will certainly adhere to it, and I will do everything I can to make sure that our voters find and get the necessary ID that they want to cast their ballot. We're talking about absentee voting as being problematic. Well, it's not, because under this current law, the voter has to send back a copy of their ID, even with their absentee ballot. This is where I go to vote by mail. That will ensure that more people get to participate. I have worked in elections for many, many years, over 20 years, and I am well aware and have spoken with many county clerks in the process. Voter ID simply does not prevent voter fraud, because that type of in-person voting, it's negligent, it doesn't happen. But we do have an ID law, and the person that Mr. Thurston was speaking of wouldn't have been able to vote had they had the ID under the law that we currently have. So, you know, we have laws that have tightened up our processes. The legislature passes laws every session that make it maybe more problematic for a lot of voters. But as your Secretary of State, I will make sure our voters are informed with what they need to take to the polls so that they can cast their ballot, or what they need to send their ballot back by mail. That's my promise.
Mr. Olson, 1 minute rebuttal.
Obviously, if I'm elected Secretary of State, I will enforce the law that is written in respect to the will of the people if they choose to pass this particular issue. I was asked my personal stance on that, and I happen to have my stance is based on a certain set of principles that are not dependent upon popularity polls. I don't think that voter IDs would prevent the kind of fraud that some of my opponents seem to think occurs, because it doesn't happen. In-person fraud that a photo ID would prevent doesn't occur. And as far as moving into a world where you have to use your ID for everything, that sounds vaguely like a papers, please kind of society that existed under the old Soviet Union. I would prefer that we not take steps to reach that. Thank you.
Mr. Kinlan has the next question, and it goes first to Mr. Thurston.
Thank you. This will actually be a two-part based on what I just heard, because you asserted that there have been voters who've committed fraud. And are there currently politicians in office right now in elected positions who got there by voter fraud? And what should we do about that? And the second part of this is, as our technology evolves, what can we do to improve and increase access to the voting process for citizens?
Sure. To kind of lead into hopefully answering your question, a lot of talk about vote by mail, a lot of talk about the absentee ballots, which you are to, when you're doing an absentee vote, you have to put a copy of your identification with it. In 2016, the presidential election, there were about 24% of the nation voted absentee. 20%, around 20% of those individuals, or 20% of those ballots that were sent out never returned. And of those that were returned, nationwide, 400,000 of those ballots were rejected either because it came in too late or the signature didn't match. So I am very hesitant to trust or to burden the Postal Service with the security of our elections. The system or the model that we currently have, meaning voting machines, I'm not talking about a particular vendor, is as secure as it gets. Technology is advancing, and not to sound like the Soviet Union, I'm not saying I don't want to go there, but society is going there. The world is getting smaller. And so with blockchain technology that's coming down the pipe, in fact, there's blockchain technology that the federal government's working on to help secure our voter registration, and even biometrics. I mean, we want to act like none of that is on the way, or biotechnology, I should say. We want to say that none of that is on the way, but it is. And so we can all go in a cave and act like technology is not moving, or we move with it, and we're going to have to if we want to remain relevant in the world.
Ms. Inman, 2 minutes.
Yes, the comment by my opponent on my right about vote by mail being insecure or unsecure, I would remind him that this is how our military and service people vote. When they're deployed in foreign lands protecting our country, that's the only way they can cast a ballot. Now, to vote by mail in Arkansas, you just need to be out of the country, out of the state, unavailable, or disabled. We should not have to have an excuse for anyone to vote by mail. It should be available to all of our citizens. And as I've said before, there's a security process involved in that because of our voter ID law. The signature of the voter will come back in a statement and be matched to the voter registration record as well as the copy of their photo ID. We have got to find a way to get people to participate. Now, talking about voting machines and technology, I have administered many, many elections in the state of Arkansas. I've overseen the counting of millions of ballots through these machines that constantly break down. Now, we're going to be continuing to revisit a need to replace and fix our voting machines until we look at something different. And that something different is vote by mail. It's very successful in other states. It saves money because we're not continually buying and replacing new voting equipment. The technology does not last very long, and it's a constant thing that needs to be addressed by our state and our legislature, and money will be saved in not buying more machines, and voters will participate. It's a simple solution. Thank you.
Mr. Olson, 2 minutes.
Well, as far as voting by mail, I'm not particularly in favor of it, but the statistics suggest that when administered properly, it would save us money. The state of Oregon has been doing it for 20 years, and one of the statistics I read as far as Oregon goes is that 100 million votes have been cast and 12 instances of fraud have been found. So that's an infinitesimal number of fraud there. As far as security of our voting machines, I think that we would be, ideally, the experts suggest that there should be a paper trail on all our voting machines, and that every election there should be random audits to make sure that the vote totals that are being reported by those machines match up to the paper record. I'm not sure that completely answers your question, but that's pretty much what I have on that.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Thurston, 1 minute.
Well, the voting machines print out, or at least the new equipment prints out a paper copy where you're able to look at it and it's filed where you're able to have an audit trail, if you will. The Arkansas State Board of Elections is working on or wanting to propose some legislation that would require audits, require random audits. But I'm all for cutting costs. But there is a cost of doing business, and elections is the most important thing that government does outside the military. We can't have our form of government without elections. And so I'm for cutting cost, all for it, but I'm not for cutting service or accuracy. And when we talk about elections, are we wanting, what's the most important part of an election? Is it the content? Is it the ease of voting? Is it timeliness? Do we have to know the results by 10 o'clock on election day? Or is it accuracy? And the election equipment and the capability of auditing that is the most accurate when you show up and show your ID.
Our next question comes from Ms. Ritchie, and it goes first to Ms. Inman.
Ms. Inman, if you were elected, how will you ensure the compliance with the federal election laws, such as the National Voter Registration Act?
Well, we have laws on our books, just in Amendment 51, that were written specifically to comply with the NVRA, National Voter Registration Act. So that's a large involvement with voting in the voting process, and it begins actually with the state being each state having a statewide voter registration database, and it takes it beyond that and goes to the governmental services agencies that also collect and allow voters to vote. With vote by mail, an automatic voter registration, which is kind of where I'd like Arkansas also to go, those things would be automatic. When a voter interacts with the Department of Motor Vehicles, they wouldn't be asked if they want to register to vote, they would automatically be registered. And the same for other governmental service agencies. Now, the NVRA also requires the county clerks to do list maintenance and help clean up the voter rolls to ensure the accuracy. Well, that's another thing that automatic voter registration would assist in, because voters interacting with governmental agencies would not only automatically be registered, they'd automatically have their address updated with the voter registrar. So NVRA it's what it is, and that it's a good act. It has done a lot to get more people involved, but there's so many more things that we can do in the state of Arkansas to engage our voters, educate our voters, and get more voter turnout. And my experience in working in elections will also tell you that I explain why I'm so passionate about elections and voting. I was working in elections when the NVRA came into being, so I was part of the ground floor when that was implemented in the state of Arkansas. Thank you.
Mr. Olson, 2 minutes.
Well, my answer is going to be pretty short on this. Obviously, as Secretary of State, I would work and continue to enforce the requirements that this federal law requires. And I agree with my Democratic opponent that moving to automatic registration, where you have to opt out rather than opt in, provides an opportunity for those who choose to register, who choose not to opt out, for their information to be updated. So there's less of a chance of inaccuracies, duplications, and other things in the voter registration record that could lead to people having issues voting because their information that's in the registration doesn't match up with their license or whatever. I had another thought, but it went away. I think that's it right there.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Thurston, 2 minutes.
Well, obviously, we will comply with federal law, and an automatic voter registration is something that Hillary Clinton actually pushed for back in the day, a nationwide automatic voter registration. And some would argue that to register you apart from your will could be against your constitutional right. To automatically register you to vote, perhaps someone doesn't want to be registered to vote. And so, and people move all of the time. If you automatically registered someone to vote, I mean, the month before Election Day, there's probably, I dare say, probably 1,000 or thousands of folks who move before Election Day. And so you have automatically registered them. You are sending them a ballot. And I say, why don't we just fly over the state and throw ballots all over the place and let people send them back? Because it's, in my opinion, there is no way to chase everyone down and where they live, because, you know, in the commerce of life, people are always moving and going different places, going to college, getting married, moving, and so forth. So, but there's an old federal law, like I'd mentioned before, that when you register to vote and you leave the driver's license number off or the last 4 digits of the social, it will be flagged. And when you show up to vote, you have to bring identification. And so, yes, I plan to fully comply with the federal laws and state laws as Secretary of State.
Rebuttal, Ms. Inman, 1 minute.
Thank you. I happily will rebut to that one. Automatic voter registration it says automatic voter registration, but you still have to interact with an agency to become registered. It's not just everybody in the world is registered when they turn 18. And you do have the opportunity to opt out. But vote by mail states that are already working, Oregon, Washington State, California's moving that way, they interact with the U.S. Postal Service and the mail change, address change component. So the address is constantly updated. Vote by mail is not going to come automatically to Arkansas. It will be slowly moved into that process by allowing more people to vote absentee. So my opponent doesn't seem to understand a lot about voting, which certainly doesn't put him in the place to be your Secretary of State. Thank you.
Next question comes from Mr. Kinlan, and it goes first to Mr. Olson.
Yes, and I have to bring up this voter fraud thing again, because although Mr. Olson, you did speak to this earlier, is there ongoing voter fraud in this state? And if there is, what are we going to do about it? And if there isn't, why are we spending so much time on this?
Well, to my knowledge, there isn't. And I'm sure if there was, we would all be aware of it, because those people have been made an example of. There's no better way to deter lawbreakers than to make examples of those who've been found guilty of committing a crime. As far as preventing voter fraud, my opponent says it's a law and that the public supports it and that it's likely to pass, so be it. But I don't believe that presenting a photo ID will prevent the sort of fraud that's most commonly seen. The most commonly seen fraud that we see in other states that make the news are those that are conspiracies by political insiders to game the vote through absentee, through like a conspiracy. Mm-hmm. It's not random citizens coming in and trying to vote more than once. The penalty for voting more than once or for committing that kind of voter fraud is so great that you'd have to be nuts to try to attempt it. And to answer the last part of your question, I don't know why this is such a big deal. I don't know why people are trying to make hay out of it. It doesn't make any sense to me. We have more important things in this state to worry about than dark Republican fantasies about voter fraud.
Mr. Thurston, 2 minutes.
Interesting. I guess I'm the odd man out on this panel when it comes to showing ID to vote. You can't even get on a plane, you can't drive a car, you can't cash a check, you can't do anything without an ID. And like I'd stated before, the most important part of our republic, the very bedrock of our republic, is elections. I mean, there is nothing else more important. And so we can have our form of government without roads, without education, without health care. Those are all important. But you cannot have our form of government without elections. And the problem with voter fraud, you really don't find out about it until after it's happened. You can't find anyone to prosecute it. And county clerks, they have just gotten to where they just don't bother with it because no one does prosecute it. Has there never been voter fraud? Are you kidding me? Really? Are we that crazy? But elections is the most important thing that government does. And yeah, we are eating up a lot of time on this. I hate it. I mean, yeah, it may not matter in a presidential election, one vote. What about a JP race? I mean, I have seen many school board races, many JP races, even state rep races that are determined by just a handful of votes. And say, well, what does it matter if someone comes in and votes that shouldn't, or someone else fills out an absentee and sends it that shouldn't, or someone else gets a ballot in the mail, fills it out and sends it but shouldn't. Well, I dare say that accuracy is the most important thing when it comes to elections, and if it costs a little bit more money to make sure that that happens, then I'm all for it. I'm sorry, it's the cost of doing business, and accuracy is the most important part when it comes to elections.
Ms. Inman, 2 minutes.
Thank you. Voter fraud is negligent in this country. It just doesn't happen. That whole argument is an imaginary action or accusation that's just not there. And Mr. Thurston's comment about that we could do this without roads, I don't know how people will get to the polls if we don't have roads to get there. So the voter fraud argument it's taken up far too much time in our movement toward getting more people engaged and involved in participating in the election process. We need to reach more people. This is a participatory democracy. We have to have people to vote. And I'm proposing something that's going to get people to the polls. It's not fraud when you cast a ballot in the mail. If someone were to steal that ballot out of your mailbox, that's a federal crime. If someone were to steal 2 ballots out of, or 3 ballots out of 3 mailboxes, they go to prison for life. We are talking about something and arguing about something that is non-existent. I have conducted hundreds of elections in Arkansas, and I've overseen millions of ballots being cast. I can remember one instance in working in Pulaski County where an elderly man came in and voted early, forgot, and came back to the polls and tried to vote on election day. But you know what? There's a record sitting in that polling place in that poll book saying that gentleman has already voted. So if he, denied that process, he would be given a provisional ballot that would be decided and would be processed when it goes back to the election commission. There are so many procedures and protections in place. This is just a non-existent question. We want people to participate. I want people to participate because we elect good people and make good decisions when we have people participating in our democratic process. Thank you.
Mr. Olson, you have 1 minute for rebuttal, sir.
Like I've said before, the instances of fraud that a voter ID would prevent are virtually non-existent. One of the statistics I've read on this suggests that I have more of a chance of being struck by lightning than I have of committing this kind of voter fraud. It just doesn't happen. I think our time and our energy, if we really are interested in the security of our elections, our time and energy would be better spent in making sure that when people use electronic voting machines, that their vote is accurately counted, there's a verifiable paper trail that the voter can see where he voted, and that audits are done randomly to ensure the accuracy of what's reported by those machines. I think if we focused on that, we would ensure that any potential hacking or fraud would be prevented.
Mr. Rell has the next question. It goes first to Mr. Thurston.
Mr. Thurston, you said that there was no controversy while you were in office, but as Commissioner of State Lands, you spent more than $28,000 on a bass boat and equipment. You said that the boat was needed to inspect the waterways of debris because your office was getting a number of complaints. In the end, were you able to produce many complaints or a number of complaints? And looking back on it, do you think purchasing a bass boat was a wise choice?
Yeah. Well, calling it a bass boat, it is a boat, and you could fish out of it, I suppose. It is a water vessel. It is a tool for the office. And looking back, would I not have purchased it knowing the number of complaints from that point till now? Yes, because it's easy for a liberal blogger or my opponent to do a song and dance at the Capitol accusing me of using it for personal use. And you know, it's easy to be when you're on the outside looking in, to make accusations, to try to smear someone's credibility. Not knowing the history, not knowing what led up to that decision, not knowing the man hours that I had to pull from Game and Fish to take us to look at waterways. We have a waterways division. And I am so glad I purchased it that the next land commissioner will not have to deal with this. And so they will have a tool at their disposal that they will be able to address waterways issues. And so let's put this election aside for a moment. Here was what was below the belt when Susan got up there and did her dog and pony show at the Capitol. I have been land commissioner for 8 years, and I have worked hard, our staff has worked hard to do our best to fulfill our obligations to the state. $40 million budget, returning $130 million back to the counties, which goes to fund public education. All of the 8 years, and I'm not going to just sit here and let someone smear my 2 terms as land commissioner, making accusations about a tool that I purchased for a particular division. And again, I have never personally been in the boat, but for her to go up there and insinuate that I have been fishing in it in personal use and blah, 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 you know, that's below the belt for me. And regardless of how this election turns out here, I just want the Arkansans to know that I have served them honorably.
Ms. Inman, 2 minutes.
Thank you. I never said you were using the boat for personal use. I questioned the decision in purchasing a boat that it exceeded nearly $30,000 worth of expenses, ongoing expenses, thank you. It was a poor decision, should not have been made by the land commissioner, and I leave that poor decision to what are you going to buy if you're Secretary of State. I want to be a good steward of our monies and save millions of dollars for voters in Arkansas. You say you've had no controversy in your office. Well, there's one now. This is a problem. People are listening to this. They do not appreciate the stories that they've heard about John Thurston, the bass boat buying guy. It's not appropriate to even be in a place with the power that you can spend this amount of money just to have a toy to sit in a garage because it's only been used 6 times since you bought it. 6 times. The Game and Fish Commission has always offered boats to do the things that you need. I don't think anybody who's in your office is trained in debris removal. So you still have to contract with someone else to do the duties that were written into that act. And that act that was passed, which by the way, John Woods was one of the sponsors, who's now in prison, we're seeing far too much wasted money, for personal gain, and this is just another example. This is not what we need in your Secretary of State's office. You need someone with skills, leadership, preparedness, and I'm Susan Inman, and that's who I am, and that's why I'm ready to run for this seat.
Mr. Olson, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think we've probably talked enough about fishing boats. If I had been in Mr. Thurston's shoes, perhaps I would have thought about it a few minutes longer than he did, seeing that the controversy that's come out about it. Yeah, I don't think it was a wise choice. I'm sure it might probably seem like a good idea at the time, but hindsight, you know, what they say about that. Again, I don't know that this is behavior that would predict his future behavior if he's elected. Probably not. It's not much use for a bass fishing boat as Secretary of State. So I think we're safe on that front. Thanks.
Mr. Thurston, 1 minute rebuttal.
No, she did not say directly that I used it for personal, but she just insinuated again that it was a toy setting in storage. And again, these are half facts that took a lot more thinking than probably Mr. Olson would have given it. I knew when we purchased the boat, I knew good and well this moment would possibly come. I knew it. But I have a responsibility. I'm the only one up here that has taken, well, someone may have taken an oath to be elected, but as an elected official, I took an oath and said that I will faithfully discharge the duties of Commissioner State Lands. And it's easy to armchair quarterback. It's easy to do that. We do it to coaches all the time. We do it to pastors. We do it to school teachers. It's easy to do that from the outside and not knowing any of the history, any of the laws, or any of the facts. So yes, I'm with you, Olson. I'm tired of the boat too, but we can talk about it for another 30 minutes if we want.
Well, in fact, we have reached the point where we need to use that 30 minutes or what's left of it for closing statements because we're at that part of the debate. We would thank Mr. Kinlan, Ms. Ritchie, and Mr. Rell for their participation, for their questions in this year's debate. And as was determined by a drawing prior to tonight's debate, to repeat, time for closing statements. And our first this evening goes to Mr. Thurston.
Well, again, I want to thank everyone who's watching. And regardless of any criticism that I've received over the past 2 or 3 weeks regarding my performance as Land Commissioner, I want you to know it has been an absolute honor to be Commissioner of State Lands. We've talked a lot about elections tonight, and we should. But in the Secretary of State's office, 10% of the staff works with elections. Not the whole 140, almost 140 employees. I'm the only candidate that has run an office. I know I've been through a transition. I know how to implement systems, controls, policy, procedures, and I know how to fulfill my responsibility as an office holder. I've been through 8 audits as Land Commissioner. They are all clean audits. You think they had a problem with any purchases, they would have definitely spoken up, I assure you. But I have been over 40 people for 8 years, and again, no controversy during my time as Land Commissioner. Accusations trying to smear me in these final days at an election time is nothing more than what it is, to try to smear me because either they don't like me, either they don't like the party that I'm with, or for whatever reason. And anyone that knows politics or campaigns knows that the person who does the most attacking is the one that's behind, and the one who is being mostly attacked is the one who is ahead. I am the front runner in the polls. I am the front runner in this race. I'm asking for your vote, and again, I'm the only candidate that has successfully run a constitutional office. This takes someone with a CEO mentality, someone that can look at the big picture, not just a division. I'm John Thurston, and I'm asking for your vote.
Mr. Thurston, thank you. Mr. Olson, 2 minutes.
Again, I appreciate AETN for providing us all this opportunity to discuss and share our views and ideas with you, the public, the voters. I think that as a libertarian, my foremost concern is protecting the individual rights of all of our citizens. So I would keep that foremost in my mind as Secretary of State. And as a mental health paraprofessional for nearly the last 10 years, I believe I have the skills and experience to deal with the legislature, to deal with the other constitutional officers, having fulfilled that role working with children with behavioral problems. So I have a unique set of skills that I think would prove to be useful in being Secretary of State. Thank you.
Mr. Olson, thank you. Ms. Inman, 2 minutes.
Thank you. My whole career has been in election administration. As I said at the beginning, I've worked 20 years conducting elections, state and county and internationally. I am ready, I am prepared, and I am best suited of the three of us standing here to be your next Secretary of State. I am the only candidate who has worked in the Secretary of State's office where I was Director of Elections for the state of Arkansas. Now, voting is 100% originated from the Secretary of State's office. That is the thing that reaches all of the people. That is why we're here today, voting and voter participation. There would be no need for a debate if we didn't have candidates, if we weren't able to vote. This is our democracy. This is it. This is why we're here. I have a plan, I have the leadership skills, and I have the experience to carry it through. I want Arkansas to move to vote by mail, where more people will participate, better decisions will be made, and I will save millions of dollars for the state of Arkansas, and I won't be buying a bass boat, I can assure you that. Thank you, AETN, for putting this on today. It is an honor to be here. Thank you for your questions. The journalists were wonderful, and thank you for the audience that is here, and I ask respectfully for your vote to be your next Secretary of State in Arkansas. And may the best woman win. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your participation here in the audience at the Reynolds Center, UCA in Conway, and for watching at home. The Libertarian, Democratic, and Republican candidates for Arkansas Secretary of State. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Major funding for Election 2018 AETN Debates is provided by AARP Arkansas.